Alrighty, you guys, so within your time on the tower defense genre in Roblox, you're 100% gonna come across an event tower sometime while you play. And so the other day, I was sitting on Tower Defense Simulator looking at my many event towers. Having played the game since 2019, I've gotten almost every single event tower at this point. And I had a thought occurred to me. When was the last time I had actually used some of these towers outside of right after I got them, or I just wanted to run an event tower specifically? And then I had something pop into my head. No one talks about using event towers in strategies. More specifically, strategy makers in tower defense games typically do not use event towers as they are limited content that most people do not have. And so as such, obviously, they do not want to make their strategy reliant on a tower no one has. And that is okay. This video is by no means a knock on strategy makers, because believe me, I was a part of Tower Defense Simulator when they did use event towers in the meta, and it was not fun. That being said, event towers just do not have good usage rates. I hardly ever see anyone running event towers outside of, maybe the new one when it comes out. For instance, Warlock right now is incredibly popular, being the brand new event tower that does a good amount of damage and is overall seeing a lot of use because it is new. That being said, 6 months down the line, no strategy maker is going to be talking about Warlock. They've, moved on to the next event to, get that next tower. Because at the end of the day, the reason a lot of people use strategies is to unlock these, these new event towers, and then they never get used because they go and follow another strategy to get the next one. Take a tower, for instance, like the Commando from Tower Defense Simulator. The Commando from Tower Defense Simulator is a DPS event tower that overall nobody uses. And this is due in part to the fact that whenever you got it for free to play, that was in the summer 2019 event, which was about 6 years ago. And so obviously many of the original people who got Commando no longer play the game, or overall just do not want to use the tower. And I think this is because it has so little time in the spotlight. I had heard that the Commando rework was not super great, and so I never even touched it after the rework until recently when I decided to try it out for a meme and found out I really liked it. There was so little coverage on this tower that the one thing I heard about it was negative, and so I just never ended up using it. And so then I had a realization of, it's not that these towers are bad, it's just that no one talks about them, and so they're basically forced to resign to the Shadow Realm where they never get used. You can use Commando in almost any spot that you would use Accelerator or Warlock or Minigunner or any other form of late game DPS tower, and it does that job well. Obviously, it's not identical to these towers, it has its own unique mechanics. I would argue that Commando trades a bit of the DPS that Accelerator has for a bit more utility in the form of its missiles, but overall it still holds that same archetype down really well of being a late game damage tower. I should also note that I do not think event towers should be like the most meta tower in the game. That is not how you balance a tower defense game. If the best towers are ones you can't get outside of, Robux, I think that is a really poor balancing decision. I think event towers are very tricky to balance because they need to be in a spot to where they are good, almost on level, or slightly worse, or slightly different than a already regular base game tower. Like, I think the way Tower Defense Simulator does Commando and Harvester as slightly dubbed down versions of Accelerator and Ranger that just provide a slight bit more utility. I think those are phenomenally well balanced event towers, because I do think you can run Harvester or you can run Commando over one of those Ranger or Accelerator tower archetypes, and your loadout will still function. But that being said, I am not here to say, oh, event towers need to be meta, because that is not how you make the game fair for people who weren't playing the game 100 years ago. And so the issue here is that these event towers never get talked about because they're old and because, not everyone has them. And so they're never talked about when people talk about playing the game, but they are still good towers that just no one talks about. And I think overall, these towers need to be discussed more. They need to be in the spotlight. Again, with a tower like Harvester. Harvester is, it is very similar to Commando, where it has a similar tower in of Ranger, except it trades a little bit of damage for a bit more utility. And overall, event towers are always made to be unique. They're always meant to have some form of, unique mechanic that other towers do not have. And that is why I think we as a community need to talk about and use event towers more, purely because they have so much more character than the average tower. I mean, Commando has a reload mechanic, does a lot of damage, and shoots missiles that stun enemies. I mean, that is like such a more interesting tower than a guy that just sits there and just, deals damage like the minigunner. Now, of course, these basic tower archetypes like minigunner are not bad. They're flat, they're basic, and event towers, they just have so much more character to them, and I really feel like they just need to be talked about and used more, because a lot of event towers just sit in people's loadouts and just basically gather dust. And so my solution for this is pretty simple, which is when making a strategy, I feel like strategy makers in general should talk about, more broader strokes. Because at the end of the day, I'm admittedly not a super big fan of strategies. I think, what's the point if you're gonna, play the game, the strategy game? I would recommend, making your own strategy. That's where I see the fun in tower defense games. But also at the same time, I can totally understand I need to get this event tower. I need to use something that I know is gonna work. I understand that line of thinking, but at the same time, I feel like strategy making, instead of it being, use this tower on this wave, it should be more of, use these, tower archetypes, do a damage tower here, when you need to pass that DPS check. And I feel like overall, strategies as a concept need to move away from how to play the game and move towards teaching people how to play the game. Teach players how to deal with a DPS check, like the mega slow and hardcore. How do we deal with such a, tanky enemy at this stage of the game? Teach them, when to farm, when to not farm. Because another huge problem in tower defense games right now is, you'll get that one guy who just sits there and farms the entire game until late game, and obviously that doesn't work. And so I feel like strategies, should move away from using specific towers at exact moments, and instead move to, teaching actual strategy, teaching that intellectual thinking. Because then, I feel like these event towers that, fill certain archetypes would be able to see a lot more usage rates from, people that have these towers whenever they're being told, use a damage tower, instead of, use accelerator, use a damage tower. I really, really think that line of thinking would make, playing the game, especially with a strategy, just so much more entertaining. That being said, I am not a strategy maker, so obviously I'm well aware there would be some, difficulties with changing how strategies are made, but I really just think that people would enjoy this more. I think it would add a lot more, gameplay to the game, go figure, and overall, I just think it would be so, fun to do. But that's just my opinions. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I really am curious to see what y'all think about this, because, again, I have so many event towers, and it took me until, 2 weeks ago to realize I need to start using my event towers more, because a lot of the event towers in Tower Defense Simulator and Tower Defense X are both really good, with a few exceptions that are, not very good, but they're generally pretty solid towers that you can work into almost any pre-existing strategy, and I think that we as a community need to address that more. But anyways, like the video if you liked the video, subscribe for more Saltz, and as always, you guys know what's coming. Make stuff you're proud of.